Hi, I'm Ted Perkins. I'm a hydraulic engineer for FEMA, and what I do, along with Wendy, who's here today, is oversee the flood maps that we do for the National Flood Insurance Program. So you can see in this upper reach, you see a blue area that delineates the 100-year flood or the 1% chance probability flood. And this is basically showing what the flooding extent could potentially be with a flood that has a 1% probability of occurring in any given year. So in areas of low population and low development, that's all we do. But as you move downstream, you can start seeing detailed AE zone areas. These are areas that FEMA has done an extra level of analysis because it is in a more populated area. And we define things called like a floodway, which is this candy cane striped area, where we feel the deepest, fastest water is and where we're trying to keep the community from having any significant impact on that flow, because when you do build in those types of areas, it has significant impacts on the floodplain. As you can see, there are a lot of structures nearby, and so if you start blocking flow, there can be impacts. I'm going to get into more of the specific floodplain regulations that we are working with. In these regulations, you'll see on the side of this slide 44 CFR, and the CFR stands for Code of Federal Regulations. And in that, as it relates specifically to the floodway, we must reserve an area in order for the discharge of the 100-year flood or the base flood, so that it doesn't create more than a certain rise of a designated height. And so if you go into 60.3D, it actually specifies that height of you can't have greater than a 1-foot impact. And so on the right, you can see the FEMA floodway, and then the crosshatch is what happens if all that area gets developed. And if you start looking at that in your model, when does that start creating a 1-foot rise? And that's how we define what our floodway is. Again, in the regulations, it prohibits encroachments in the floodway unless it has been demonstrated through hydrologic and hydraulic analysis performed with standard engineering practice that the proposed encroachment would not result in an increase to the community. So the question becomes, when you're trying to build a restoration project, a lot of the times you're trying to reconnect side channels. You're trying to get the river to go back to where it used to be. So can you do a restoration project in a floodway? And the answer is yes, you can. But you have to follow all those same processes that we have for any other potential development in and around the floodplain. So FEMA and at the regional level, we can't waive any of those regulations that are out there. And not only that, but they're in those regulations, it talks about if you are going to do that type of work, you need to do hydrologic and hydraulic analysis to determine whether you're having an impact on that 100-year flood elevation. Because if you are building that floodway, you are building in that, or not necessarily building, but if you're having an impact on it, then we need to look at how that's going to change that risk picture for the community. And so there is even the ability to increase that flood elevation, but there are added regulations associated with that. So you do need to notify all affected landowners that they are potentially impacted by that change. You do need to get concurrence from the community. And so your first step in any process where you're doing this work is to get a floodplain development permit from the community. And then you also need to make sure that any increase that is occurring is not going to impact a structure. So can habitat restoration still occur in the floodplain? Yes. You do need to start by talking to your local community and get a floodplain permit. Then, as part of it, if you're working in a floodway, a hydraulic analysis is going to be required. If the project will cause the base flood elevation to increase in the floodway, then you do have to go through a conditional letter of map revision. So again, just the key thing is checking in with the community. They are going to ask for a hydraulic analysis. And so then there's two avenues there. You either need to show that it's not going to cause a rise, or if there is going to be a rise, you do have to go through a conditional letter of map revision process to update the maps and inform everybody of the change risk. So the key thing with trying to establish a no rise is you're actually having to communicate to the community that you do not think your project is going to cause an impact. And as part of this, we do not necessarily expect communities to have hydraulic modelers on staff. And so they need to actually rely on approved FEMA modeling. So that is why you have to kind of start with FEMA's models. And from that, what you're looking at is doing the before and after condition to show whether you can prove that there's a 0.00 impact with your project. As part of the no rise analysis, again, the easiest way is if you can use FEMA's effective model. And, I know there are cases where that's not going to entirely work because the model is outdated or not in the right format. And if that's your case, then you can do instead a duplicate effective model, which is where you take a different model, but you calibrate it to the current effective model. So you make sure the profiles match and all of that. If you're in a situation where the natural conditions have changed, you can then use a corrected effective model. So you correct the natural situation. Now, if there's other physical things that have gone on the ground that are man-made, that gets into a more complicated situation, because if that's not reflected in the maps, then that might potentially be a violation and it becomes a little more complicated. So ultimately what you're trying to do is you're trying to show your pre-project condition to your post-project when you look at the difference between the two, you're showing 0.00 rise or less. So if you are having an increase, which a lot of times it's very hard to actually do stuff in a floodway without causing some increase somewhere. So then you just need to factor in that you do need to file a conditional letter of map revision. And so that you just kind of put that early in the process. You try and get connected with FEMA early, and you want to submit what we call an MT2 form. And so this is where you're going to submit your hydraulic models and essentially get them approved by FEMA. And then that helps to notify everybody of the change risk. But as with everything, and one of the reasons why I love working with rivers is that they're all different. And when you're working with different rivers in different areas, and different communities will have different added regulations. So what I've been talking to you today is about the minimum regulations that FEMA provides to the community, but many communities can actually have additional requirements. So again, it's important to first check in with your floodplain administrator and pursue the floodplain development permit. If you think there's any chance that there is going to be any kind of a rise, factor in the conditional letter of map revision process as part of your schedule. And when you have questions or you run into bumps, feel free to shoot me an email and we can kind of talk through that process. So thank you very much for your time.